All right, AP, here we go again. Another audio lecture. I've had a lot this year thanks to these snow days. How many of you stayed in your PJs all day? I should create a poll on Google Classroom. All right, let's hop into a maybe not as fun topic, non-democratic regimes. I'm not going to get into so much of the abuses of non-democratic, regimes today. But we will, touch on some of the ways that they stay in power and what causes them. So let's dive right in. Non-democracy obviously means that power is not in the hands of the people. So the government doesn't answer to the people, and frequently the public has no say at all in selecting the ruler, although sometimes, or rulers, although sometimes there'll be sort of sham elections or rigged elections or some method of making it seem like the people still have the option to participate. Rule of law likely ignored, and individual freedom is severely restricted. There may, still be some elements of the ability to do things like, say, protest, but in a controlled fashion. Or there may be some press, but it's really limited by the government. Non-democratic regimes can be institutionalized and legitimate. So it's very important to remember that these regimes can maintain legitimacy through various forms. Sometimes non-democratic rule is called authoritarianism, and I think you can figure out why. Why don't you take a look at the picture here, and hopefully you recognize this as Stalin, Joseph Stalin, one of the leaders of the USSR. This is one of the propaganda posters. So you see sort of the image that non-democratic leaders want to cultivate. We'll see a few more images like this later on in the slideshow. So as of 2012, these are how many states in the world are ranked as free, partly free, and not free by Freedom House. I really recommend the Freedom House website. Get on it if you haven't been on it. It's fascinating. You can take a look at how countries move up and down the ranks of free or not free. In the U.S., look at the U.S.'s ranking over the last few years. There's a nice scary poster from 1984. So when you think of totalitarianism, I want you to think of the regime from 1984. That is the very definition of totalitarianism. Most regimes that are authoritarian are not totalitarian. A totalitarian regime really has to seek to control every aspect of its citizens' lives towards like a certain end or purpose in order to be considered a totalitarian form of government. Government's going to be highly centralized, have a very strong ideology. This is why the USSR was a totalitarian regime under Stalin. He was seeking to control people's, actions and lives and thoughts. And he definitely used violence to remake the government and even the society in the USSR. So totalitarianism is a rare form of government because a lot of pieces have to come together to make this work. Even China is not a totalitarian government, although they have some aspects where it seems like maybe they might be moving that way, but they are not. North Korea really is the only example left today of a totalitarian regime. So why do some governments end up authoritarian? And there's several theories for this. Modernization, elite society, international relations, and culture. So let's take a look at those more in depth. So modernization, right? There's a theory that actually modernization is supposed to lead to democracy, but it doesn't always, because modernization is disruptive and it can kind of come in starts and fits. And if you think about U.S. history and industrializing and modernizing and how that looked and the shakeups that society went through, right? You can understand perhaps how this could lead to a non-democratic regime coming into place. We see still in the U.S., right, that urban areas are growing, that people that live in urban areas tend to have different values, tend to be much more liberal and progressive than people in the rural areas of the country. This is not a judgment. This is simply saying that that's the divide that we're seeing. Rural areas have been left behind in this country and typically are in modernization as industry and then service concentrate, in urban areas. And that leads to people in those areas having more access to better infrastructure, education, technology, and again, others being the have-nots. So the economy shifts, right? Our economy shifted from industrialized to, to service. Economies shift from traditional economies to industrial economies. It's very disorienting for people to go through those changes. And then it brings with it a shift in social values and gender relations, and that can be really hard. So people might say, oh my goodness, my country has changed into something I don't recognize. And that makes them support an authoritarian leader who promises tradition and order, and we will supply goods to all people, like this. So they might promise that they'll get rid of inequality, right? Promise that, and typically does not happen under military regimes or dictators. But that's how they come to power. People support that. They say, right, I'll give up my rights to have a say in my government in order to have more of the economic pie, more access. Okay, another theory is that elites who are in power don't want to give up power. This we know to be true in various places. It's very surprising when someone steps aside who has power, which is why George Washington was so shocking to many people, because he willingly gave up power. In countries that have a lot of natural resources, and typically it's oil, but it's not always, any natural resource can be used to support a non-democratic regime. But in countries that have those resources, they have what's called the resource trap, whereby elites are reinforced in power because they determine who gets access to the resources. They don't want to give up access to the resources, so it makes them cling to power more. The only way to keep having access to the resources, of course, to stay in power. And they have access to a steady supply of money without having to resort to taxes, so it makes them less accountable to people. And then they have this wealth to distribute amongst certain followers so that they can reinforce their power. And typically in countries with resource traps, they fail to diversify their economies. And so they will be dependent on this one good, and if the market for that good crashes for any reason, then the country goes along with it. One example of this is in Zimbabwe. Mugabe actually has been removed from power, but Zimbabwe still isn't doing well. Anyway, they were very dependent on diamonds, right? Diamond wealth. And here's an example here of a diamond mine. It's incredibly scarring to the area. To get a sense of the scale of this, and I'm not sure actually if this is a Zimbabwe one. I think I might have pulled this from Russia. Don't quote me on that. This is a city in the background. So I just want you to get a sense of the size and scale of this diamond mine. And it goes down and down and down. Here, I did have one that had a picture of a truck in it, so you could get a sense of the scale, but you're not going to be able to see it here. It would have to be on the smartboard. All right, civil society, lack thereof, can also lead to non-democratic rule because people don't have the option to express themselves the way that they do in countries with strong civil society. So populism can pop up, and leaders who promise to take the country back to a certain stage or to tear down institutions that keep others from having access to resources then are able to take power. So this is what Hugo Chavez does in Venezuela, where he promises the lower classes that they will get the wealth of the upper classes and socializes, bring socialism to Venezuela. It's not working out right now, so it was a try, but it didn't quite work. All right, I'm sorry, my son is upset, so I'm going to go take care of him, and I will have to continue this in a minute.